The Oracl Network.
Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. If you like this show and you want to be a part of it, please DM me about covering a missing but not forgotten case. If you're selected, I'll send you the written copy of our missing but not forgotten person. All you have to do is record yourself with the information. You don't need any special equipment to do this either. You should be able to use your smartphone or computer to record, and then just send it to me. I would love to make this a regular thing, so be sure to DM me if this sounds like something you'd like to do. Find me on the socials. Facebook and Instagram is Beyond the Rainbow Pod, or Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok as Rainbow Crimes. I'm so grateful for your continued support of Beyond the Rainbow. It's crucial for this show's existence. Telling a friend about the show is a great way to further your support. Leaving a 5-star review helps other listeners find the show, and it gets the ever so important stories of the victims out in the universe. I found some new 5-star reviews, and you guys are completely awesome. This episode, I have my friend Paige from Reverie True Crime to tell us about this episode's missing but not forgotten.
Hello, Rainbow Warriors. Our missing but not forgotten is Alex Adrian Ailman, who was 24 years old when he disappeared from Dallas, Texas. Alex walked into his work on July 27, 2005. He told his job he was quitting because he was going to California, and that's the last sign of him. Alex had a history of drug abuse and may have been depressed at the time. He's described as between 5'8" and 5'9", and weighs between 175 and 185 pounds. He's Hispanic with black hair and brown eyes. Alex usually keeps his hair very close cropped or shaved, exposing a skull tattoo on his scalp. Alex has a number of other tattoos on his body, including his last name, Ailman, A-L-E-M-A-N, on his back, and All Eyes on Me on his chest. Alex was an active member of Dallas's LGBTQ+ community. His family says he has no ties to California, but does have ties to Arizona. If found alive today, Alex would be 40 years old. Should anyone have any information on Alex, please call the Irving, Texas Police Department at 972-273-1030.
Thank you, Paige. This coming Sunday, August 8th, Forensic Files 2 will feature another LGBTQ+ related episode. In fact, their show is all about how they gathered and tested evidence to catch a serial killer, the very serial killer I'm covering in this episode. Take a listen.
A shocked city reels as a killer targets local women.
The community was up in arms. People were scared.
At this point, we have very strong reasons to believe that these 3 victims may be linked.
Sex workers are very likely to be targets of not just violence in general, but especially serial killings.
Animal hairs, fibers, and a fingerprint provide clues, but no suspect.
We really had no idea about who had perpetrated these crimes.
Sometimes you think you have the right guy and you jump all over it just to find out that it's not.
Be sure to watch this Sunday, August 8th, Forensic Files 2, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, and 7 p.m. Pacific Time on the HLN Network. The seedy part of town in Spokane, Washington is a stretch of Sprague Avenue. Just east of downtown is what is known as the Red Light District. Many cities in the U.S. have these types of areas. It's what we've come to accept as normal in a bigger city. Drugs, homelessness, gang activity, and sex workers are common fare here. In 1990, at least 3 sex workers would be picked up from the Red Light District in Spokane, and they would be viciously murdered. I wouldn't necessarily call the 3 women friends, but sure, they knew each other. And they all had been called upon by the same man within a matter of months. The same man who struggled with his inner demons of jealousy, disgust, and hatred. The same man who would decide that these women weren't worth the air in the atmosphere, and they must die. Yolanda Sapp was only 26 years old. She was a mother of 2 young daughters, and she was engaged to be married. It sounds like she had her life mapped out and had things going for her. Financially, Yolanda was not well off. She had to work, and Yolanda's job was a sex worker. She had to make money to be able to keep her family fed and a roof over their heads. It was survival sex, much like it is for many sex workers. In the daylight hours of February 22nd, 1990, with the exception of a little bit of jewelry, Yolanda's body was found naked halfway down a steep embankment along the Spokane River. She had a green army-type blanket wrapped around her feet. Close by, a floral comforter lay wadded up on the ground. Yolanda had been murdered at some point during the darkness hours. A dusting of snow covered the ground, and it was a cold 30 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.55 degrees Celsius. It's hard to imagine a sex worker having to be outside earning money in that kind of temperature. But perhaps Yolanda had performed her job in a vehicle before her body was discarded along the riverbank. Yolanda had been shot by a small caliber gun. The weapon used on her was a .22. There were bullet wounds in her back. She also had scrapes on her forehead and some under her armpits. 34-year-old Nikki Lowe was found on March 25th underneath the Green Street Bridge that crossed the Spokane River. It was a little warmer this day than when Yolanda was found. There didn't seem to be any snow cover, but the incoming clouds were threatening rain. Nikki had been shot once in the chest by a .22 caliber weapon. Her body was positioned with her legs up on the guardrail, and her back was laying flat on the ground. Nikki's pants had been pulled down to her knees, exposing her genital area, and Nikki's top was pulled up, exposing one of her breasts. Nikki had marks and bruises along her backside, which suggested she might have been dragged and pulled to the guardrail. From her tears and blood stains, a medical examiner was able to determine she was fully clothed when she was shot. After that, her pants were pulled down, and that's when she was dragged, causing her bruising and marks. Days after Nikki's body was found, there was a man dumpster diving for aluminum cans. He came across a red wallet. The man took it home with him. Once he was at home, he looked at the wallet and he found Nikki Lowe's driver's license. He had just seen a news report on Nikki, and he immediately called the police about the wallet he found. In that same dumpster, police were able to find some other items belonging to Nikki. And as we so often see in true crime, Nikki's husband was brought in as a suspect in her murder, but he was later cleared and released. Late in the afternoon on May 15th, the body of a 38-year-old Indigenous woman named Kathy Brisbois was found naked 4 feet down an embankment at the Spokane River. Kathy had been shot in her head, chest, and right shoulder, all at close range with a .22 caliber weapon. Kathy had also been struck on her head with some type of blunt object at least 8 times. You might ask why this crime was so much more violent sounding than the other two. I have an answer for that. Kathy was a badass, and she fought hard against her attacker. She fought and she scratched the hell out of him, and this left crucial DNA under her fingernails. Over 2 decades later, Kathy and the brave fight she put up will be the reason that the serial killer was caught. Police started to believe the aforementioned 3 murdered sex workers might have been the work of the serial killer later learned to be Robert Lee Yates. But the crime scene stage was a little different than Yates' victims. Yates' signature sign was putting a plastic bag over his deceased victims' heads after he shot them. And Yates used a .25 caliber, not the .22 used on these 3 women. Years later, police would learn Yates was actually in the military overseas at the time of Yolanda, Nikki, and Kathy's murders, so this ruled him out altogether. They also looked into the possibility that it was the Green River Killer, who was later identified as Gary Ridgway. And yet again, the way Ridgway operated was different than the way Yolanda, Nikki, and Kathy were murdered. Detectives started to research their records. They did find a man that was arrested 6 months before our first victim, Yolanda Sapp, was found murdered. It was a 47-year-old Spokane resident named Douglas Perry. He was arrested for patronizing a prostitute. When police looked up Douglas's record, they found his criminal record was ginormous. It started when he was just 22 years old and he was arrested for second-degree assault. 5 years after that, he was hauled in for dangerous weapon violations. At the age of 34, he was again arrested for second-degree assault. Later that year, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, also known as ATF, nabbed him for having a pipe bomb in his possession. When they served a search warrant on Douglas's home, the ATF found over 20 handguns, almost 30 rifles, and over 20,000 rounds of ammunition. Seeing that Douglas had prior dangerous weapons violations and previous assault charges, he wasn't supposed to have firearms around anymore, let alone own a fuck-ton of them. The feds took away his weapons and then they slapped his hand and released Douglas, until he was arrested for soliciting a prostitute in 1989. Douglas had an obsession with weapons. And I can just hear you right now, Rainbow Warriors. No kidding, CJ, you think? Yep, it's true. He was a collector. And no stupid law was going to stop him from keeping things he was passionate about. He began to collect more guns, more ammunition, and more weapon paraphernalia. As well, he continued to solicit sex workers, even living with one named Claire Ann Galloway for a while. In 1994, Douglas was picked up by the feds again on another weapons charge. When they searched his home this time, they found over a dozen firearms, including several .22 calibers, and over 12,000 rounds of ammunition. Douglas would have to serve a little bit more meaningful of a sentence this time. He was released after 4 years served in 1998. After his release from prison, Douglas picked up a sex worker and he brought her to his home. Just an hour later, she was back out on Sprague Street, and she told an officer she started to talk to about the weirdest encounter she had just had. She told the officer she was over this guy's house and he had the weirdest shit just laying around. She said she saw mannequins, crossbows, and all kinds of weapons and ammunition everywhere. It was just strewn about the house. At that same moment, Douglas happened to be cruising by, and the sex worker pointed Douglas out to the cop. "There, that guy," she said. The officer pulled Douglas over, expecting to find weapons in Douglas's vehicle. He made Douglas get out of the car. On Douglas, all he found was a stun gun and 2 knives. When he searched the car, the only item in the car was a brochure on gender reassignment surgery and some paperwork from a doctor stating Douglas had gender psychosis, and he also had a very deep resentment towards women. Having nothing really else to hold him on, the officer had to let Douglas go. By 1999, something was going on with Douglas. Something more than him just being an odd, quirky little man. Douglas had something he needed to do. He booked a flight to Thailand. In the following year, in 2000, Douglas Perry would have sex reassignment surgery, and he would become Donna Perry before he flew back to the United States. In April of 2000, serial killer Robert Lee Yates was apprehended. He wasn't just making Spokane headlines. He was making national news. And it seemed as though the murders of Yolanda, Nikki, and Kathy were just a 10-year-old cold case. In 2008, DNA analysis was getting better. The police in Spokane ordered a renewed review of DNA evidence in the 1990 case of the 3 sex workers murdered and left by the Spokane River. In 2009, blood and skin DNA from under Kathy's fingernails were entered into CODIS. Unfortunately, there were no hits. Just 3 years later, CODIS did get a hit for matching DNA in Yolanda, Nikki, and Kathy's cases. But law enforcement were befuddled at the disparity of the suspect. The DNA belonged to a woman named Donna Perry, who was arrested by the ATF for possessing an arsenal of weapons and ammunition. This woman was being held in a jail in Texas after getting busted. After some digging, the Spokane law enforcement were able to learn that this woman was a trans woman, and her dead name was Douglas Perry. It wasn't long before Donna was extradited back to Spokane and in a room speaking to the detective about the 1990 murders of our victims. Now, with the help of my friends, Seth from Thanks for Coming TFC, a RuPaul Drag Race recap podcast, he will lend the voice to suspected killer Donna Perry, and my friend Kevin from the Jury Room podcast, who will play the part of the detective. We're going to try and recreate as accurately as possible just what went on in that interrogation room.
I should probably have an attorney here if you're going to question me about something.
We have another order of business we have to take care of today. We have a search warrant to obtain a sample of your DNA.
In conjunction with what?
In conjunction with some old cases that we are investigating. I want to make sure that you want to talk to me about this, okay?
Well, I should have a lawyer here if you're going to take my DNA and all of this.
Your lawyer doesn't get to be here while we serve the search warrant.
Why do you want my DNA?
We have a search warrant for first-degree murder, and we believe you have information about the murder.
I really think I should have a lawyer here if you're going to ask questions. By the way, what questions are you asking?
You want a lawyer so I can't talk to you? If you want to talk to us, then you need to tell me that.
Yeah, I think I better have a lawyer. This is crazy.
Here's your copy of the search warrant.
Well, I can't read it without glasses.
The detective read it for her. He then instructed her how to swab her cheek to provide samples. Handing the swabs back to the detective, Donna asked,
Am I accused of murder or something?
You're the prime suspect in multiple murders.
I don't understand. What's going on?
Again, Donna, we can't talk to you. You've asked for a lawyer. Unless you tell us you want to sit down and talk, and you do understand your rights of having an attorney and your right to remain silent, these are your rights. All they do is restrict me. They don't restrict you in any way. You have the right to talk, and you have the right not to talk, okay? So I'm absolutely going to honor your right to an attorney at this time, which is why we are not really freely discussing the whole thing with you, but it is your right. I'm going to tape up the box with your DNA samples. I'll be right back.
About 5 minutes passed before the detective returns to the room with Donna.
Well, tell me what's going on. I don't understand a thing. I need a lawyer or somebody to explain what's actually going on.
The detective gives a brief description of the crimes to Donna and of the CODIS hit that led him to her.
I'm totally freaking out. I feel very paranoid right now. And I'm totally in a panic mode. I have a million questions.
Well, I only have 1,000, so you got more than me. Like I said before, it's your right if you at any time decide you want to discuss this, but until that happens, I'm not too terribly comfortable asking you anything about it to clarify things. So, that's where we're at. Do you have any other questions for me?
What are the names of these people?
I'm not comfortable going down that road.
I can't believe I'm a suspect and you could possibly think that I have anything to do with this.
I'm going to give you a few minutes to finish up that soda. Then, I'm coming to take you back to jail.
The detective left the room and about 6 minutes passed before he returned again.
I still can't believe I'm getting blamed for something I had no part of. Can you just leave me your gun and one bullet so I can finish it?
Donna stared intensely at the detective. Finally, she broke her stare and she said,
Fine. Let's talk. Let's sit down and work this out of my head.
Okay, but before we talk, I need to reread you your Miranda rights.
And he did. She said she understood them.
I will try to answer your questions.
Have you ever picked up a prostitute?
Well, I did pick up some prostitutes, yes. But I always let them out, and they were alive and well when I let them out.
The detective then took out 13 photos of sex workers from the Spokane area. 3 of the pictures were the 3 women that Douglas was suspected of murdering.
Do you recognize any of these women?
Only Claire Ann. We lived together for a bit, and I would never bring a prostitute home when she was there. It was too disrespectful.
Maybe something you weren't aware of made you stop killing. Because here's the real thing to me. People that kill people, multiple people, over periods of time, they generally keep going once it starts.
Yeah.
So, the question to me as a law enforcement officer who studied that is, what made Doug stop?
Douglas didn't stop. Donna stopped it. The gender change operation.
Do you really think that's what stopped it?
I do. Yeah, I'm convinced of it. There's no more testosterone to fuel the anger.
So why did you kill these women?
I'm not going to admit I killed anybody. I didn't. Donna has killed nobody.
Doug did.
I don't know if Doug did or not. It was 20 years ago, and I have no idea whether he did or didn't.
And Donna pretty much stuck to the story as if she and Douglas were entirely 2 different people. Here's the thing about that. So many trans women who were born in the wrong body and have gender dysphoria do not claim to have been 2 different people. This is more of a dissociative personality disorder. Donna would sit in prison, finishing out her sentence for her arsenal of weapons until 2014. Then she would be charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder for killing Yolanda, Nikki, and Kathy. The trial was supposed to begin in 2016, but it was pushed back till 2017 due to an ethics breach in the public defender's office. A witness for the prosecution was a woman named Chero Everson. Donna had spent several months in prison with Chero. They even spoke about marrying each other. The following is what Chero testified Donna had said to her while in prison. It's not a direct quote, but I think it's a good interpretation of what Donna must have said to Chero when they were locked up together.
Since we are to be married, I might as well tell you everything about me. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I'm apparently a sociopath. Guns and ammunition are my hobbies. I've collected some of the rarest and prettiest guns over the years. For employment, I had made money by being a contract killer. With my beautiful gun collection, I decided it was time to clean up the streets of Spokane. I killed 9 prostitutes. They were nothings, nobodies. They were pawn scum. I'd take them in my car by the river and kill them in my car and then kick their bodies out. Burying them would be someone else's problem. I never thought it was right these women could bear children and I couldn't. I mean, what a waste of ovaries, right? Being able to create a life inside of them, watching and feeling that life inside of you for 9 months. What a joy that must be. It made me very jealous of them, of all women. I wanted nothing more than to be able to have my own family. You know how I had told you I killed 9 prostitutes? It was actually between 20 and 30. They made me so angry. Then, to get the heat off me, I went to Thailand in 1999 to have sex reassignment surgery. I had the surgery in 2000. Who would be looking for an elderly lady with mental illness as the killer? There was no way I thought I would ever get caught.
Chero then testified that she was getting nothing in payback for testifying. No early release, no softened penalty, nothing. Donna was ultimately convicted by a jury of her peers of being guilty, and she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Nikki's family asked that Donna be put into a men's prison. That way she wouldn't be endangering other women in a women's prison. At the age of 69, Donna Perry is incarcerated at the Washington Correction Center for Women. Thank you to Seth of Thanks for Coming podcast and to Kevin of the Jury Room podcast for lending their voices to Donna and the detective. That could be a band name. Now on stage, Donna and the detective. Never mind. This episode's quickie crime took place in Cleveland, Ohio in 1980. And since the Olympics have been currently going on, although they might be over by the time this episode airs, this case has ties to an old-timey Olympian. Honestly, even though the crime is really sad because an innocent life was lost, the truly interesting part about the story to me is the Olympian and world record setter herself. I'm speaking of a track and field superstar named Stella Walsh. Stella was born in Poland in 1911. Her given name is long as fuck, and I don't even know if I can attempt to say it correctly. But here it goes. Stanislawa Walisewicz. Everyone repeat that back with me. Yeah, Stella works. A little something about Stella that the public never knew until she was murdered and the autopsy was performed. Stella was intersex. She was born with male genitals and they were small and not functionable. She had more male chromosomes than female. Not to get too graphic about this, but to give a better understanding of why Stella was considered intersex, her small penis looked more like a large clitoris, but it had no hole to pee or excrete semen from. She had small testes and she had a small hole in her perineum, and that's how she was able to urinate. Okay, I lied. I got graphic. Sorry. Stella lived her entire 69 years as female. She called her male parts a mutation she wasn't meant to be born with. I realized when I was researching this case, I was trying to place a gender on Stella based on her genitalia. I wanted to say she must have had gender dysphoria and be trans if she was born with male parts. But I can't do that. Intersex is an umbrella term that falls outside the strict male-female binary, and there are many ways that someone can be intersex. Having both male and female genitals is just one way, but it's not the only way. And I think I'll just stop right there on the explanation lest I confuse it even more. For this case, we just need to know Stella was intersex, and very few people in her life knew this secret. Stella and her family moved to the U.S. when she was just 15 months old. She was made fun of growing up because she didn't look like the normal feminine girl in her classes. Stella was quiet and not very charismatic either. In high school, she was called Bull Montana after a famous wrestler-actor of the time. It was not meant to be a compliment. Stella was always a very athletic girl. She played basketball and baseball. She particularly excelled in track and field events. At the age of 17, Stella won her first heat at the Olympic trials, qualifying her to become a participant in the next Summer Olympics. That was going to be held in 1932. She had also won the 60, 100, and 200 meter sprints and the running long jump at nationals. This earned her the description of world's fastest woman. After winning many track awards those 4 years, Stella decided to represent her home country of Poland at the age of 21 at the 1932 Olympics. There she took home a gold medal in the 100-meter dash, and she set a world's record. She then was given the titles the Polish Flyer and Queen of Sprint. 4 years later in the 1936 Summer Olympics, Stella lost her gold medal reign in the 100-meter dash. She took home a silver. She lost to an American woman named Helen Stevens. Ironically, Helen was accused of being a man. And Helen had the very first ever forced Olympic genital inspection. Helen was indeed a biological woman. Can you just imagine how humiliating and dehumanizing that must have been for Helen? 1936 was the last of the Olympics for Stella, but she still would continue to run. She'd compete and still win hundreds of races afterwards. She settled down in Cleveland, Ohio, and she would coach and train children in track and field as well as other sports. Stella was a huge celebrity in Cleveland, and she worked for Cleveland's recreational program. Stella also continued to keep fit and run even at the age of 69. On December 4th, 1980, Stella was giddy. She had spent the day thinking about her home country of Poland and sports. These were two of her biggest passions in life. While other past Olympians were making advertisements and being sponsored by big companies, they were raking in the money. Stella never really earned much money ever, but she was a simple woman and that was okay with her. This particular evening on December 4th, she had a wad of cash in her pocket. She was going to purchase ribbons for the women's Polish national basketball team. They would be arriving from Poland to play Kent State's women's basketball team. The match was going to be held the following week. And at this match, Cleveland's mayor at the time would be presenting Stella with the key to the city. So Stella had a lot to be excited about. She had purchased her bag of ribbons at a discount chain store and she was heading out to the parking lot. When she was almost to her car, 2 men approached her with a .38 pistol. At 69 years old, Stella was still strong and a badass. She reached for the gun to disarm the thug that was holding it on her. In the scuffle, the pistol fired and struck Stella in her abdomen. The bullet blew through her stomach and her intestines while severing an artery in her pelvis. The thugs ran off, not even checking for money in Stella's pockets. Stella lost consciousness. She was discovered by a man who was walking out to his car in the parking lot. He ran into a shop and he found an off-duty police officer who called for an ambulance. That ambulance never arrived because it had a flat tire. When I read this, I couldn't help thinking, Cleveland's a pretty damn large city. In 1980, there was only one fucking ambulance? Really? What did arrive was a police station wagon. Stella was loaded into it and driven to the hospital. This is where she died on the emergency room operating table. 2 young men were arrested, but then they were released. I believe that the killers of Stella are still at large. There was no unicorn justice that was served for Stella. besides discovering her male genitalia at autopsy. The coroner said that her toxicology report came back double the legal limit, which is probably the real reason why she had a lapse of judgment and tried to grab the gun from her assailant. Stella also had cirrhosis of the liver and testicular cancer. Headlines screamed after her death, "Stella was a fella," and that's so damn shitty. Even shittier is the fact that the Worldwide Olympic Committee nearly stripped her of the medal she had won. Thankfully, they came to their senses and they let her be. The media frenzy over Stella being murdered and possessing male genitalia, it only lasted a few days. And I think it's only because 4 days after Stella was killed, John Lennon was murdered. Lennon was the new buffet for the media to feast from. By the way, I'd like to offer a big congratulations to 43-year-old Laurel Hubbard of New Zealand. Laurel was the very first openly trans woman who was able to compete in the Olympics just this year. Laurel didn't medal, but even being able to compete while living her truth, that's huge. Good job, Laurel. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.